and thank everybody. I think this is probably our second or third webinar that we've done with CBTS. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here, so hopefully you guys can hear me. The last one we did, I think, was really successful. It was a great turnout. Matt does always, as always, does awesome. So we challenged ourselves to try to top that last webinar that we did to try to get more people. So we thought long and hard about ways that we could drive people to do this. And, you know, Teams is an important topic. I think that there's a lot of good information here. But just to be sure that we got a better turnout, we decided to give everybody alcohol. So, so I am excited for today. I think it's a great event. I did not get my Wolf's Ridge beer, so I'm going to be doing tequila shooters while we talk here. But but no, I do appreciate your time. I am excited. It's great content. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to the wonderful Matt Douglas.
Rob, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity here. And I'm excited to learn more personally about Wolf's Ridge. So I think that's thank you very much, you guys, for joining us here on this. The thought was today that we would kind of break it up a little bit. Try and maybe talk a little bit to Wolf's Ridge first and have them kind of, we'll do a tasting, tell us a little bit about them, then maybe spend 10 or so minutes and I'll introduce some of the things we're doing on Microsoft Teams. Then take a break, have another little drink, and then come back and kind of finish up with some questions or maybe possible whiteboarding, things like that. So as we go through this, whether you've got questions about beer or whether you got questions about Microsoft Teams, please use the chat and question and answer feature there in WebEx, because we'll grab those and Gabby will just stop us. She'll just interrupt me or interrupt Wolf's Ridge. So we hope this is a little bit of fun today, and I'm going to turn it first right now over to Eric and Kathy over at Wolf's Ridge. We're excited to hear some more and taste some beer, so go right ahead.
Hey everybody, thanks for having us. Kathy's going to talk a little bit about tasting, but to end the suspense, go ahead and crack your first beer here, which is the Heartlandia.
All right, hi everybody, thanks Matt, thanks BBTS. We wanted to just kind of give you guys a little bit of an introduction on how to taste before we started tasting these beers. But like Eric said, the first one that we're going to taste today is Heartlandia. That's our all Ohio lager. We'll talk about that in just a minute here. First of all, if you don't want to taste these beers, you all should have gotten 2 of each. One for now and then one for later. Or if you have some important stuff to do later and you just want to drink one of the beers during the session or none at all, feel free to listen along. We're going to have some educational and process-related, ingredient-related information too. So it's not a total loss, all right? So first things first, we're going to talk about glassware. Number 1, you see that Eric and I are pouring into non-chilled glasses. The reason why we're doing that is that if you have a chilled glass, may mute some of the flavors and aromas that are going to come out of that beer. Secondly, on the tasting sheet that was included in your package that we sent, you're going to notice there's a level of complexity that's listed on that sheet. What that means is, you know, the lower the number, 1 is the least complex to 10 being the most complex. And you're going to want to taste these beers in order of complexity. So that's what we're doing here today, so you don't overwhelm your palate and overwhelm your senses. So first things first, when you are tasting a beer, you want to bring it up and just give it a couple quick sniffs. We call that the bloodhound technique. You don't want to oversaturate your senses, but you do want to get like I said, a couple nice quick sniffs. That's going to be 90% of what you taste is going to be through your olfactory senses. So make sure you smell what you're drinking before you drink it, and then go ahead and take a sip. And when you do, you want to kind of swirl it around your mouth and make sure you coat all of the surfaces of your mouth. And also, unlike wine, where you can spit it out, beer needs to be, you need to swallow that. There is carbonation in beer, so some of those bubbles, that effervescence is going to bring forward some additional flavors and aromas as well. That's it for now, so let's get to the tasting. The first beer, like I said, is Heartlandia. Eric's going to talk a little bit about that.
So what I taste in this beer, first of all, I get kind of a fresh cut hay. Heartlandia is about, 5-ish%. We call this 4.2%. We call this lawnmower beer. I mean, it's light, it's easy drinking. You're cracking one at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday as you go do your yard work. So yeah, that fresh cut grass really reminds me of that. Get a little bit of like saltine cracker, just that light, really crisp. And then some nice herbal, refreshing bitterness. We make lots of big beers, hoppy beers, but when it comes to the lager beer, you really want it to be crisp and refreshing, first and most of all. In Heartlandia, we use 100% Ohio-grown ingredients, and 3 years ago, that would have been impossible. In our industry, after Prohibition, all of the family mom and pop hop farms, went out of business. And now the epicenter of American hop growing is in the Pacific Northwest. They grow 58,000 acres of hops in America every year. We grew 70 acres out of 58,000 in Ohio.
To put that into perspective, the big three, the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, like Eric said, grew 58,000 acres out of 60,000 acres. Michigan was the number 4 state, hop growing state, and they grew 700 acres.
Yeah, so there's really, and then the barley malt that we grow here is the Pearl varietal. So it is a Old English kind of thing brought to Ohio, fits our climate. When we say support local, what does that, mean? We're a local business. We're family owned here in Columbus, Ohio, self-distributing, funded, self-operating. So how do we support farmers in our own community? The vast majority of the American malt is grown in the upper Midwest, so more like the Minnesotas and the Wisconsin. Been in the news a little bit lately. So it's pretty cool for us to be able to go out of our way to support Ohio farmers. We're paying a pretty significant premium to do that. But you got to vote with your dollars. So yeah, thank you for trying this deliciously light Heartlandia. And thank you. We'll send it back to Matt. Cheers.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've got a quick question for you guys. In Wolf's Brewery, Wolf's Ridge, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, please.
So I noticed that you're tasting a lager here at first. I typically think of lagers as the big, nasty, ugly American beers, but it feels like I'm seeing more and more microbreweries get into the lager business. And I know myself, I've started to buy more lagers from. What's that trend looking like?
Well, sure. So, we brew what people want to buy, but we also brew what we want to drink. The brewing tradition in America is heavily informed by the German people. They came to America, between the 1860s and the early, part of the 20th century. And, the big American breweries, Budweiser, Miller Coors, all those are Pabst, those are all German breweries. It's hard to make a good lager, and it takes longer. When you've got a big hoppy beer, you can hide some off flavors behind those, those big hop flavors. They cover up a lot of your mistakes. I always think about it kind of like when you're listening to rock and roll music, there's a lot of distortion on that guitar. So, the guy doesn't have to really hit every note just perfect, where the lager beer is just like playing an acoustic guitar. Even if your fingers slides down the fretboard just a little bit, it'll sound weird and off. And then, consumer preference, really. I mean, stuff that's light and drinkable. I love drinking IPA. So my favorite beers are all 7.5% versus 4% in Heartlandia. So,
Yep.
I'm somebody's dad now, man. I can't always just be getting.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I know, like I said myself, I've been buying more lagers.
Oh, yeah, me too.
All right. Let me put up my screen here. Hold on just a second. All right, Gabby, can you see that?
Yeah,
there
that
we
looks
go.
good.
Okay. All right. So we'll spend about 10 minutes or so here talking a little bit about teams. As I go through this, think about any questions you'd like to talk about in the second segment. And the purpose, I think, of this first segment is to try and just kind of introduce you to what's going on with trying to voice enable or get a telephone call on the Microsoft Teams client. So hopefully this will be useful to you. just so you know, this really is part of our whole really kind of UCaaS practice, Unified Communications as a Service. CBTS, we're a 20-year-old company, been part of Cincinnati Bell, which is a 140-year-old company, and we're a phone company all across the United States and Canada, basically all across North America, and have been delivering, UCaaS services, if you would, Cisco Call Manager and BroadSoft. Somebody wants to take and move their services to the cloud. We've been doing that for almost 20 years now. But the Microsoft Teams explosion has happened, particularly in the last year. I saw a statistic that pre-COVID, there was probably some 20 million, 25 million people actively using Teams on a daily basis. The last statistic I saw, like 2 weeks ago, was 85 million people using Teams, right? I know in my world, right, before COVID, I spent a lot of time making phone calls on a cell phone. Literally 80-90% of my business now is in some collaboration tool, whether it's Microsoft Teams, WebEx Teams or meetings, BlueJeans, Zoom, those kinds of things. So we saw a big trend, and we're not the only one, but we saw a big trend of, okay, how do we take our core and get hooked up to Microsoft to be able to augment, that desire to take a Microsoft Teams client and put a telephone number on that. And that's part of our practice. So we've had a rich history doing this, and we think if you guys are looking at Microsoft Teams, talking to Parallel Technologies, that we can certainly kind of augment that conversation and help you decide what parts of Teams you might want to use compared to your own phone system, et cetera. When we talk about delivering Microsoft Teams, right, and this is a case where, maybe somebody, has our unified communications as a service, right? They've got our Polycom or Cisco phone on their desk, but they want to start to take a Teams client now and figure out how to put a telephone number on that, right? To be able to, it's easy, right? If I have somebody who wants to give me a call today, down to a hosted phone, I'm delivering it down there. But if I want to take and put a telephone number on a Microsoft Teams client so I can dial in or out, how do you do that? Well, CBTS, we're one of those kind of leading service providers out there that have put up some big connections, what's called direct route, and connections basically between our North American SIP core and Microsoft Teams SIP cores. And so that means that we then have the ability to, deliver telephone numbers, what sometimes people call the public switch telephone network. So normal numbers, 911, long distance, caller ID, all the kinds of things you'd expect. We have the ability now to deliver that to you, to a Teams client. So basically, what happens is you have to get the right licensing, right, with Microsoft, right, because you actually have to enable some PBX features. You have to buy their business licensing up there, okay? And once you buy business licensing, then the question is, again, how do you put a telephone number? How do you get a telephone number that belongs out of the PSTN and get that down here? Now, Microsoft does offer dial plans. You can go to Microsoft and buy a dial plan. And those dial plans, they're $12 a month, right? But they're also not only kind of expensive, they're also rather limiting. They only include 3,000 minutes a month of any kind of phone call, whether it's local, long distance. And if you actually read the fine print, it's actually a 99.5% SLA. It's kind of people do it, but it's probably not the best way to get dial tone to a Microsoft Teams client. So service providers like CBTS, again, have put up these connections to direct route. So we're connecting our core to the Microsoft Teams core. And that allows us then to be able to put a telephone number, a DID number down to your Teams client, right? So that, whether a phone call comes into our UCaaS phone, whether it comes into a Teams phone, it doesn't make any difference. It can all be part of the same dial plan, all part of the same solution. Now, even if you don't have our UCaaS phone, we can talk a little bit, maybe we might talk about that in the next session about, let's say that this is your PBX and your phone system, we can do the same thing down there as well. So the bottom line is that we've been doing voice quite a long time. We saw the need for the fact that people are moving to Microsoft Teams and moving really to their collaboration client. As I talked about, I'm not using my cell phone so much anymore. I'm using a collaboration client. And if Microsoft Teams is my collaboration client, I'd like to be able to enable that to dial in and out to the regular world. So we're there to help engineer with Parallel Technologies with you how you might be able to kind of combine these into your network. Now, this really is kind of an example, and I mentioned we could talk later about how we might connect down to your local premise, and we can kind of come back to that. But why would somebody possibly buy, Direct Route or Microsoft, put a telephone number on their Microsoft Teams client with somebody like CBTS as opposed to directly buying from Microsoft? And this slide here really is about the fact that this really is kind of some of the advantages, and that whether we're integrating with your PBX. In fact, this actually, I should have changed this. We're now including free long distance in this offering. And so, whereas compared to Microsoft, you get a limited amount of telephone calls, 3,000 minutes a month, and then you have to pay overage. In our situation, whether it's a local call, long distance in North America, United States, that's free LD. So the ability that we can integrate in with your PBX. Then there's also a whole group of other features that the phone system in the cloud, if I go back a slide here, again, when you talk about voice enabling a Teams client, you're actually letting Teams do some call control. It becomes your phone system in the cloud for these numbers. And the truth is that this phone system has less capabilities, right? It can't do a number of things like shared line appearances, key system emulation, things like that. IVR, call recording. There's a lot of different features. So one of the things that when working with a partner like Parallel, we talk about is that not only do we believe we've kind of got the right dialing package, right, that we can integrate with your existing PBX, but also if you need some call control out of the cloud from us, we can bring that to the table as well, because it's already part of our core. We've already got this kind of 20-year-old mature SIP core. So Microsoft, when they allowed a provider like ourselves to come in and connect to their Direct Route and API and augment those services, actually kind of can end up being the best of both worlds for you. Kind of already mentioned some of this, is that the bottom line is that there is significant savings if you're going to be looking at a Teams client at voice enabling, either all your users, part of your users. That's some big advantages that we can give there. So I think that's probably enough right now to go through. I think I'd like to kind of turn it back to Wolf's Ridge, but again, the intention was to introduce you to a little bit that CBTS and Parallel Technologies, if you want to take a look at the capabilities of how you might, voice enable a Microsoft Teams client, what some of those options are, how do you find the right provider? Is this a cost savings move, a quality move? Both of those things are true with us. Those are some of the things that we'd like to explore with you. But so right now, Eric and Kathy, I'd like to turn it back to you guys, and let's try another brew.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I feel like we're learning a lot here. I'll have to email you after the presentation with some specific questions.
There you go.
So the second beer we're going to try here today is Daybreak, which you guys all have in your package there. So Daybreak is pretty unique, and this is where those olfactory senses really come into play.
Yeah, I can smell it just that pour. You just get that. It's like opening up a fresh bag of fancy coffee shop beans.
Absolutely.
It's like good stuff.
So this one is kind of a little bit of a trick on the senses, right? So whenever we would serve this beer, when we first started brewing it, people would come into our tap room and they would say, I want the coffee beer. And so we would put this down in front of them and they'd say, no, I ordered the coffee beer. So typically, for a long time, coffee beer has been known as dark. And, there's a little bit of bias there. But obviously, as you guys can see in your glass and my glass here, that this beer is not dark at all. This is a coffee vanilla cream ale. So we brew this starting with a cream ale, which was the most popular style of beer pre-Prohibition. It was basically the American brewers' answer to German, as we were talking about before, German brewers that came over. They brewed these really light, nice beers. And the American brewers took that and started to brew a cream ale, which was very nice, light, and refreshing. It has a little bit of sweetness in it though, because we use an adjunct as per the recipe, which is going to be flaked maize or corn. So you get a little bit of sweetness from that corn. So that's the base beer. And then we take that beer and we use whole bean coffee beans, and we infuse the cream ale with those whole bean coffee beans as well as Madagascar vanilla beans.
If any of you folks are from Columbus, we get the coffee beans from One Line Coffee. It is the Cadillac of Columbus coffee roasters. I mean, it's the best coffee that we can find.
Yeah, so they are a small batch roastery as well. So they go and pick out the individual batches, etc. So the beer is going to change a teeny tiny bit to the knowing person. They might be able to detect it from time to time, but most people won't. We use a light roast and a medium roast. And the way that we keep the color and the body of the cream ale with imparting some of those aromas and flavors is by using the whole beans instead of ground coffee. So doing that, you don't get a lot of the bitterness. The oils kind of come off of there during the infusion process, and you get a lot of that aroma.
It's all about the aroma.
Really nice on the nose.
This is our best-selling beer. I mean, this is the beer that's going to put my daughter through college. There's 7,000 breweries in America, and we are the only one whose best-selling beer is a coffee vanilla cream ale. The Great American Beer Festival is held every October in Denver, Colorado. It is kind of the Emmys or Grammys, or I'm sure there's a telecommunications equivalent, awards. Last year, we won the silver for this beer, which we were so very proud of. But this year, we got the gold. So there are 9,000 entries. So this is a world-class beer. We are incredibly proud of it. Wolf's Ridge, we've been here 7 years now. We were started by Kathy's dad and Kathy's brother. Kathy actually hired me 7 years and 1 month ago now.
Worst decision of my life.
Yeah, we're terrible. So once again, family-owned, self-operating. We have a fine dining, kind of casual fine dining restaurant and a tap room in downtown Columbus, as well as an event space. We do weddings and bachelor parties and all that kind of stuff. If anybody's getting married or any of the, baby showers, we've done a great job with the socially distanced component of that as well. Yeah.
So this is, Eric and I really enjoy the beer side of things. And this beer is one of, like Eric said, one of the best beers that we brew. And it once you take kind of that coffee, and then add the Madagascar vanilla beans, which we tried to sub it out for some other kind of vanilla beans. The cost of vanilla beans have gone up exponentially over the past.
Madagascarian vanilla is the finest vanilla found anywhere in the world. When we first started buying the beans, they were about 80 cents a piece. And then there was a typhoon and a series of, people are more into culinary things around the world. So those beans go for about $3 a piece now. And they are so expensive, in fact, that the farmers in Madagascar have had to, towards the end of the growing season, sleep in their fields with machine guns to keep people from coming and poaching it. So valuable is this Madagascar vanilla. So, yeah, let us know if you have any questions about this one.
Yeah.
There was one question. Is there any caffeine in that?
So, yes, I did the math. It is coffee is roughly 3.5% caffeine by weight. So you look at how much we put in, how much we get out of the thing. So there's about a quarter of a cup of coffee's worth of caffeine in the beer. So it's my theory that the sleepiness of the beer would get you well before the wakiness of the caffeine would get you. Your results may vary, though.
That's very good.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, let me grab the screen here. Gabby, as we were kind of going through this, were there any particular questions that came up at all?
Yeah, so there were a couple. Can I use Microsoft Direct Route for some users and not others?
Sure. Actually, let me just go over and grab a whiteboard here. That's a great question. I mean, if this is, CBTS, if you would, and, this is Microsoft Teams, And we've had a number of these conversations with Parallel. And again, we've got our direct route connections, from CBTS to Teams. And, maybe today you've got, I know that Parallel does a lot of Mitel, phone systems. So, maybe you've got your existing Mitel phone system here today and, it's connected via SIP trunking, let's say. And you want to start to test out some Microsoft Teams clients, right? And to get telephone numbers to those, a Microsoft Teams client is going to, register back to Teams, right? And we can as well then enable that telephone number down there. And then, even if, let's say, long term, you'd like to, have a certain amount of Teams clients, but also then be able to kind of connect those two together, we can bring down SIP trunking, where we become the telephone dial tone provider for you, if you would, so that then really we can even connect your on-premise phone system to your Teams clients as well. So, and it doesn't have to be all of them, right? You can have a number of Teams clients that you decide that you're going to be using Microsoft Teams in your world for collaboration and meetings, but you've got 10 people you want to have a telephone number to. That's not a problem. We can work with those things. That's a great question. Any other questions there?
Okay. Another question, is Microsoft Teams less expensive than other UCaaS offerings?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me clean it up this way. Here, let's just do this. So, you've got a Microsoft Teams client, and usually today, people kind of in the commercial space have got what's called an E3 license. There's an E1, 3, and 5. And the 5 is really expensive and comes with a number of other features typically most people don't buy. So usually they're on kind of an E1 or 3. And let's say that you're looking at UCaaS, right? You're looking at somebody's UCaaS, whether it's CBTS or RingCentral or 8x8 or there's all sorts of places to look, right? That typically we'll call that is somewhere in the $15 a user range for UCaaS. Now you've got your Microsoft Teams license, right? And that Microsoft Teams license we talked about is registered back to Teams, right? And so from a Teams to Teams client, without paying any extra money, they can talk to one another via VoIP. There's no telephone number to them. But the moment you want to turn this into a UCaaS equivalent, meaning that you want to have a telephone number here, right? And you want to be able to dial out to the world to deliver a phone call or receive a phone call, you got to do two things. One, you have to take and add the business voice license to your Teams license. And that is an $8 for the business voice plus $4 for conferencing. So you're talking about adding $12 a month just to get the PBX features turned on, the phone features turned on inside of Teams. Now that still doesn't get you a telephone number yet. So then either you've got to buy a dial plan like we talked about from Microsoft, because they're connected to the public switch telephone network. They're connected to the phone network, and that's $12 a month, right? So if you go the complete Microsoft route, you're like $24 a month to turn this client into a UCaaS equivalent. And I'm not saying it's not worth it, but there's real expense there. Now, we then talk about, we believe you're better off getting that telephone number from us via our direct route services, right? And our cost is going to be, somewhere, depending on how many users, somewhere in the, $5 to $10 range. So we're going to be less expensive, more flexible, a better SLA. But the real thing, Stu, is you've got cost here. These costs, if UCaaS is $1 sign, then this at a minimum is $1.50 or $2 signs. It's actually turning a Microsoft Teams user into a full UCaaS experience, being able to take a phone call and receive it, it's not the cheapest way to go. But again, people are loving their collaboration environment, right? Now, that's what's been happening for us too, by the way, is that Cisco has been making a lot of huge strides in our core, because we're a Cisco core in our UCaaS, and adding a product that's now called WebEx for BroadWorks. That's what our core is. And it is a heck of a competition against Teams. So I will say that if you're not wed to Microsoft Teams yet, looking at what collaboration tool you want to work on, whether that might be a Zoom, whether that might be WebEx for BroadWorks, that can be a pretty important decision too. But back to that original question, is it cheaper, or what that cost is on Microsoft Teams to move to that? It is not a less expensive way to go, but that's what you need to do to enable a Teams client. Any other?
And then, Matt, one other question came through, and then that's it for now. How does CBTS differentiate from other service providers that are offering Microsoft Teams Direct Route?
Sure. On one hand, it's the same. I'll be completely honest with you, right? I mean, AT&T has connected to them the same. Verizon's connected to them the same. There's only one way to connect to Microsoft Teams. Our differentiator, I think it's the same differentiator for Parallel, right? Is that we're big enough to matter, but right-sized enough to be flexible and help design the right solution. Because when you're talking about moving into the Teams world here, there's also even conversations about what you might need to do in your network to enable Teams, because now you're going across the internet. Are you going to keep your same phone system and try and make that work along with Teams client? Are you going to look at UCaaS plus Teams? It is not, and then even in the Teams environment, it can't do everything. I talked about kind of features like it can't do a door buzzer, right? It can't do overhead paging. It can't do a shared line appearance like I've got maybe a parts counter where calls come in and I want to stack them up and go to any phone and pull them off. That's just not Teams. Teams wasn't built for that. So Teams today still needs a lot of consulting. So the question is, what differentiates us? Again, I think it's like Parallel. There's other places to go. AT&T and Verizon have the same kind of product. What we bring to the table, like with partners with Parallel, is that consulting, that flexible approach, and to be able to help you in that journey, because it's not just turning a switch. So. Okay, I will, we got another tasting here, so I get all excited, I apologize. But let me turn it back over to Wolf's Ridge Brewing, and we'll go through a little bit more, see what the next beer is.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. So this is our last beer here. It is called Impish or Admirable. For any of you who are fans of the American television program The Office, it is a reference to that. There is a Pennsylvania Dutch Santa Claus analog called Belschnickel, and he does not ask the kids if they are naughty or nice. He asks them if they are impish or admirable. So that's where that came from. This is a winter lager. Probably the most famous one would be the Sam Adams Winter Lager. But we brewed ours inspired by pumpernickel bread. So as you sip on that, imagine yourself eating a loaf of $7 crusty artisanal bakery deliciousness.
And so on that note also, so a lot of the flavors and aromas that you're going to get on this beer are malt derived flavors. So there's 4 main components to beer, 4 main ingredients. Those are going to be yeast, hops, malt, and water. Water is a very important component to beer, but also the most boring. The other 3 are kind of more interesting. Some people may say malt is the most important character in beer, or the most important ingredient in beer.
The backbone.
Other people say hop. Other people say yeast. So what malt does is that it provides the fermentable sugars that yeast will go forward and eat to create to create CO2 and alcohol and other aromatic compounds and such. 100% of the color that you're going to have in beer is going to come from the malt, unless you do something silly and put an adjunct like cabbage or something.
Right, and don't confuse color in beer with strength. Guinness is, I think, a perfect example of that. A pint of Guinness in America is typically like 4% alcohol. It is got some nice flavor, but Guinness is pretty thin in body. I mean, that is not a big beer to me. So this beer, even though it's pretty dark, 6%, back to the Heartlandia test, is it refreshing? And I think this is still, that's why we use the hops in beer to make it bitter. The bitterness and the sweetness, it's still refreshing. So 6%, got some nice color, a little chocolate, little rye, spicy notes, a little bit of that like dark stone fruit I get from the malt, that kind of like cherry, plum, maybe like dried cranberry, but still delightfully drinkable.
Absolutely. And as Eric was saying, don't judge a book by its cover. A lot of beers you see dark and you automatically think it's going to be filling, it's going to be really heavy. One of the nice things about this beer is that it's a lager. So a lager is going to finish really crisp. The difference between an ale and a lager, we talked a little bit before, Heartlandia is also a lager. Talked a little bit about light lagers. Like I said, this is also a lager. And the difference between the two is the strain of yeast that you're going to use to brew the beer. So lager yeast, it's all the L's. It's lower fermenting on the actual vessel. It's lower fermenting in the temperature. It takes longer to ferment than ales do.
Lager means to store in German. Mm-hmm. So lager beer is stored for 6 weeks to allow it to finish fermenting and get that like crisp, clean, refreshing. A lot of the ales ferment way faster, way warmer. But then, yeast is a biological creature. The warmer it is fermenting, the more of itself, flavors and stuff it leaves behind, which in certain styles, Belgian, Hefeweizens, that's really desirable. But in something like a lager, you don't want that. You don't want those little complex alcohol flavor molecules, either esters or phenols, what they're called. You just want that crisp, bready, full-bodied deliciousness.
Absolutely. So this is actually one of the first winter ales that we've ever brewed. We kind of steered away from it for a while, but
yeah,
this winter seems like it might be a long one. So we decided to go ahead and take the plunge and make a winter beer here. And so yeah, this is the result. Nice, kind of eating the crust of a bread flavor to it.
Big fan. So thank you to CBTS for having us. My wife is so sick of hearing me talk about beer. We've been together 15 years now. I've been at Wolf's Ridge 7. I was working in beer before that. So she's always like, yeah, I get it. It's liquid. So really cool. Thank you for joining us, learning a little bit about the great products we sell and the great products they sell. So we sure appreciate it.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions on either this beer or any of the beers or anything we do here, you can see obviously in the background here, we have a lot of barrels. So we do a little bit of everything. Some souring, some barrel aging, things like that.
Yeah.
Over about 200 beers in our portfolio over the last 7 years. So.
Yeah, I've had every one at least once. So yeah, thank you so much, and let us know if you have any questions. Sure.
Fantastic. I've got to thank you very much, guys. I've got a quick question for you, and that I'm from Indianapolis, and I live in Indianapolis. Is your beer in Indiana at all? Can I get it anywhere in Indianapolis?
So we're not in Indiana yet. The alcohol laws are largely written by the state. And so taking beer across state lines in America makes it tremendously complicated. And the regulatory effort would eat up most of the
profits.
Financial, but on a small scale until then you're moving a lot of it. So, but have you been to Sun King Brewery? Or
absolutely.
Watery Chair that's there too. Epic is.
We've been to a lot of local brews. Absolutely, yeah. Sun King, very familiar with, no question.
Yeah, I've gone to Indianapolis just to drink beer a few times.
So what if I want to? Because I go to Cincinnati. When I go to Cincinnati, where should I go to?
Have you been to Jungle Jim's?
Yep.
Jungle Jim's. We are in there starting like 2 weeks ago.
Okay. All right. Fantastic.
Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you guys from Wolf's Ridge. Rob, is Rob still on Schmidauer?
I think he is, but we did have a quick question.
Sure.
Okay. As a follow-up to the last answer before we went to the brew tasting, if you went with DR and currently have E3, would you have to pay the DR $5 to $10 and $12 to Microsoft Teams to turn on the phone feature?
Yes, let me pull that screen back up again, just to make sure we're real clear. And it just unfortunately is how it is today. We're talking about, yeah, so you've got, let me just clear up a little noise here. You've got an E3 license today, right? You're paying monthly for the Office 365 and all the stuff that comes with that, right? To turn the PBX on, just to make it even start to be a phone, you have to spend the $12 a month with Microsoft to add that on, or you have to move to an E5 license where business voice is included, but that typically moves you up to like a $50 license. It's pretty expensive. So usually with an E3, people don't move to E5. They get the extra $12, and then you have to buy dial tone for it. So you have to buy either somebody's direct route or that Microsoft dial plan that I talked about. There's no other way around it. So the moment you want to get a Teams client to have a telephone number, a DID number from the outside so somebody can call it or a call can go out, you got to buy that PBX functionality, and you have to buy some kind of dial tone from somebody that's going to connect that. We obviously think we're a good candidate. So yeah, great question. Anything else?
Okay. Can this integration also be applied to any Power Automate tasks or perhaps Dynamics 365, or is this Teams only?
Ask me the question again.
Can this integration also be applied to any Power Automate tasks or perhaps Dynamics 365, or is this Teams only?
Let me answer it this way, and maybe we need to get the email from that person and call them back. But when you're talking about doing computer telephony integration, maybe a screen pop, something like that, you know, if this is a PC right here, you know, your PBX, your phone system sometimes got a link to write an API. We open up our APIs on our UCaaS product, so you can do screen pops and those kinds of things. And then Teams has certain APIs that they open up when you buy, and some canned things for Microsoft products like Dynamics. So I think probably we need to take this question and call them and find out exactly what kind of integration they're doing, because certainly between us and or Parallel, we've been familiar with a lot of those. So if you would, pass that email address over to me if you would.
Okay, will do. That was the last question that came through. So I will go ahead and unmute, or Rob, I think you're unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, Gabby, thank you. Matt, awesome discussion as always. And, you know, Wolf's Ridge, guys, really awesome selections, and I can't wait to drink the rest of them. So thanks everyone for your time, and we hope to talk to you more in depth about the Teams integration with CBTS.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Wolf's Ridge.
Thank you.